If you ask 10 people, should I rent or buy a house? 9 of them will say, well, obviously buy. Why would you throw your money away paying someone else's rent? Sounds reasonable, but this way of thinking is extremely flawed. Why? Because that logic only compares one number, your monthly mortgage payment versus monthly rent, when the actual decision to buy a house involves way more cost components that aren't obvious up front. And once you add all those components together, the answer can look very different from what you'd expect. Give me 10 minutes and you'll walk away with one simple formula called the 5% rule that you can use to figure out, for any given house price, what's the actual equivalent rent you should be comparing it to. Not the mortgage payment, not a gut feeling, a concrete number you can calculate yourself tonight. Quick disclaimer, this isn't personal financial advice. It's a general framework you'll need to adjust to your own situation. But let's start with the basics. Why? Renting equals throwing away money is flawed. All right, before diving into the formula, we need to clear up the misconception at the root of this. The popular assumption goes, if you rent, your money just disappears every month. If you buy, your money builds up in the form of a house. So buying is automatically better. Let's clear that up right now. The house you buy also costs money every month. It's just that the cost isn't as visible as a rent check. There's something called an unrecoverable cost. Money you spend that you'll never get back, no matter what happens. Rent is an unrecoverable cost, sure, but mortgage interest, annual property tax, maintenance, homeowner's insurance, those are all unrecoverable costs too. The only difference is that when you rent, all those costs get bundled into one clean monthly number. When you buy, the cost gets split across different line items, which makes it feel lighter, even though the total can actually be heavier. So the real question isn't rent or buy, which is cheaper, and that's too simplistic. The real question is, what's the actual total annual cost of owning a specific house, expressed as a percentage of that house's price? That's exactly what the 5% rule answers. What is the 5% rule? So what exactly is the 5% rule? Basically, it's a way of breaking down the total annual cost of owning a house into 3 components, which when added together, come out to roughly 5% of the house's value per year. Picture it this way, a simple analogy. A house is kind of like a car you're renting from yourself. You still have to pay a usage fee every year. The difference is you pay it to the bank, the government, and the contractor, instead of to a landlord. The 3 components are 1. Cost of capital, about 3%. 2. Property tax, about 1%. 3. Maintenance, about 1%. Total, 3% plus 1% plus 1% equals 5% of the house's value per year. That 5% figure is our anchor number. Now let's break it down piece by piece, chapter by chapter, so you understand where these numbers. Component 1, cost of capital. This is the biggest component and also the one people forget most often. Cost of capital is, put simply, the opportunity cost of the money you've parked in a house. If you buy a $500,000 house in cash, that $500,000 can no longer sit in some other investment, say, an index fund that historically returns around 7% per year after inflation. But if you take out a mortgage instead, the cost of capital is the mortgage interest you pay the bank, which in many countries and time periods has run around 3 to 4% in real terms, above inflation. So whether you buy in cash or with a loan, there's a price you pay for locking your money into a house. That's cost of capital, and the historical average lands around 3% per year. Here's the catch. A lot of people only look at the monthly mortgage payment and think, well, that's a payment, not really a cost. But the interest portion of that payment is pure cost of capital, money that's gone, exactly like rent money. Component 2, property tax. The second component is simpler, annual property tax. In many areas, this runs around 1% of the house's value per year, though it obviously varies by location and local regulation. This one doesn't need a fancy analogy. You own a house, the government bills you a tax based on that house's value every year. Full stop. This is a cost that exists for as long as you own the house. Renting never charges this to you directly. since it's a landlord's responsibility, usually baked quietly into the rent price already. Component 3, maintenance. The third component is maintenance costs: a leaking roof, a broken AC unit, peeling paint, pipes that need replacing. The historical average for this also lands around 1% of the house's value per year. This is the component first-time buyers underestimate most. People think, I'll just fix it when it breaks. But when you look at the long-term average, not just year one, which is usually still in good shape, that 1% figure shows up consistently across long-term property studies. That's the third piece of the 5% rule. Putting it together. Now let's add it all up. Say the house costs $500,000. Cost of capital, 3%. $15,000 per year. Property tax, 1%. $5,000 per year. Maintenance, 1%. $5,000 per year. Total, $25,000 per year, or about $2,083 per month. That $2,083 per month is the equivalent rent of a $500,000 house, not the mortgage payment, which might be $2,500 to $3,000 per month, depending on your term and down payment. And that number already includes principal repayment, which isn't really a cost, it's forced savings. So here's the practical rule. If the rent on a comparable house is below $2,083 per month, mathematically renting is cheaper. If it's above that, buying starts to make financial sense. Simple, right? And that's just step one. Nuance and exceptions. Now, I'll be honest. The 5% rule is a simplification. There are a few things you should adjust based on your own situation. First, home price appreciation. This rule doesn't yet account for the fact that houses also gain value over time. But be careful. A lot of people use overly optimistic local appreciation numbers cherry-picked from one boom period. Historically and globally, real, inflation-adjusted home appreciation averages only around 0 to 1% per year in the long run. Nowhere near the home prices always go up dramatically claim you hear so often. If you want to be more precise, shave a bit off the 5%, but don't overestimate your assumption. Second, taxes and mortgage incentives. In some countries, there are tax deductions for mortgage interest, which can lower the effective cost of capital. This is highly dependent on local regulation, so check the rules where you live. Third, time horizon. If you're only planning to stay 2 to 3 years, the transaction costs of buying and selling, notary fees, transaction taxes, agent commissions, which can run 5 to 8% of the house price, will weigh heavily on the math, making renting far more sensible short-term. This 5% rule is more relevant when your horizon is 5 to 7 plus years. Fourth, non-financial factors. Stability, freedom to renovate, the feeling of ownership. None of that fits into a math formula, but it's a valid life consideration. This video is purely about the numbers. Actionable takeaway. In conclusion, here's how to use the 5% rule tonight. 1. Take the price of the house you're eyeing. 2. Multiply by 5%, then divide by 12. That's your equivalent rent per month. 3. Compare it to the actual rent for a similar house in the same location. 4. If rent is significantly cheaper than that number, consider renting for now and invest the difference. 5. If the gap is small or rent is actually more expensive, buying starts to make sense, especially if your horizon is long. That's it. Not mortgage payment versus rent, but total cost of ownership versus total cost of renting, apples to apples. So what do you think, based on that math, Is the house you've been eyeing actually a better deal to rent or to buy? Try running the numbers yourself using this formula and drop your results in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. If this video made you rethink your rent vs buy decision, hit like so more people can avoid making the same math mistake. And subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. Clear numbers, no drama, no hype. See you in the next one.